The lunch rush at Riverside Community Center was always the same. Noisy families grabbing trays, volunteers serving hot meals, and the usual crowd of regulars who came for the free food program. But there was one person everyone avoided. Her name was Margaret Chen, and at 73 years old, she sat alone in the far corner every single day. She wasn't just alone by choice. People actively stayed away from her. The other seniors whispered about her when she walked by. The volunteers rolled their eyes when they saw her coming. Even the staff members had stopped trying to be friendly years ago. Margaret wore the same faded blue cardigan every day, paired with an old skirt that had seen better days. Her gray hair was always pulled back in a tight bun, and her face seemed frozen in a permanent scowl. But it was her attitude that really kept people away. She complained about everything. The soup was too salty. The bread was stale. The young people these days had no respect. She criticized everyone and everything, and nobody wanted to deal with her anymore. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, the center was packed. Families with children filled the tables, laughing and talking. A group of teenagers sat together, scrolling through their phones. And there was Margaret sitting by herself near the window, clutching a worn photograph in her wrinkled hands. "Oh, great. She's here again," muttered one of the volunteers, a woman named Patricia who had worked at the center for 5 years. "I swear that woman makes my job 10 times harder." "Just ignore her," replied another volunteer. "Give her the food and move on. That's what I do." But there was one person who didn't see Margaret the same way everyone else did. Her name was Lily Bennett, and she was 22 years old. Lily had started working at the community center 3 months ago, taking the part-time position to help pay for her night classes at the local college. She was studying to become a social worker, though some days she wondered if she'd ever actually finish her degree. Money was tight, really tight. Lily lived in a tiny apartment with her younger brother Tommy, who was 16. Their parents had passed away in a car accident 2 years earlier, leaving Lily to figure out how to keep them both afloat. Between her 2 part-time jobs and school, she barely had time to sleep. But she never complained, at least not out loud. Lily had noticed Margaret from her very first day at the center. While everyone else avoided the elderly woman, Lily found herself watching her. She saw how Margaret's hands shook when she lifted her spoon. She noticed how Margaret's eyes followed the families with children, a look of deep sadness crossing her face. And she saw the photograph that Margaret held so carefully, like it was the most precious thing in the world. Today, as Lily was helping serve the lunch line, she watched Margaret slowly make her way to an empty table. The old woman was carrying her tray, moving carefully when someone bumped into her from behind. It was an accident, just a teenage boy not paying attention while texting on his phone, but the collision was enough to make Margaret lose her grip. The tray clattered to the floor. Soup splashed everywhere. The bread roll went flying under a nearby table. The entire cafeteria went silent for a moment, all eyes turning to Margaret. "Oh, for crying out loud," Patricia groaned loudly. "Not again." "Can't you be more careful?" Another volunteer snapped at Margaret, not even bothering to hide her irritation. Margaret stood frozen, staring at the mess on the floor. Her face had turned red and her hands were trembling even more now. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. The teenage boy who had bumped her just shrugged and walked away without apologizing. Before anyone else could say another harsh word, Lily grabbed a mop and bucket from the supply closet. She quickly walked over to Margaret and gently touched her arm. "It's okay," Lily said softly. "These things happen. Why don't you go sit down and I'll bring you a fresh tray?" Margaret looked up at Lily, her eyes wide with surprise. It had probably been years since anyone had spoken to her with genuine kindness. She opened her mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. Finally, she just nodded and shuffled to her usual table in the corner. Lily cleaned up the spill while the other volunteers shook their heads in disapproval. She could hear them muttering behind her. "Why are you being so nice to her? She's just a mean old woman." "You're wasting your time, Lily. That lady drove away everyone who ever cared about her." But Lily didn't respond. She finished cleaning, got Margaret a fresh tray of food, and walked it over to the corner table. As she set it down, Margaret looked up at her again. "Thank you," Margaret whispered so quietly that Lily almost didn't hear it. "You're welcome," Lily replied with a warm smile. "Mind if I sit with you for a minute? My feet are killing me." Margaret seemed taken aback by the request, but she nodded. Lily sat down across from her, grateful for the chance to rest. They didn't talk much at first. Margaret ate her soup slowly, and Lily just sat there giving her legs a break. But then Lily noticed the photograph again. It was sitting on the table next to Margaret's tray. The picture showed a young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with a bright smile and messy black hair. "Is that your grandson?" Lily asked gently. Margaret's hand immediately went to the photograph, covering it protectively. Her expression hardened. "No," she said curtly. Then, after a pause, she added, "It's nobody." Lily could tell she had touched a nerve, so she changed the subject. "I like your cardigan," she said, even though the sweater was obviously old and worn. "That shade of blue is really pretty." Margaret glanced down at her cardigan, then back at Lily. She seemed confused by the compliment, as if she couldn't quite believe someone was trying to have a normal conversation with her. "It's old," she finally said. "Well, it looks comfortable," Lily replied. "And comfort is more important than fashion, if you ask me." For the first time, the corner of Margaret's mouth twitched. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was something. They sat together for a few more minutes before Lily had to get back to work. As she stood up to leave, Margaret spoke again. "You don't have to be nice to me," she said, her voice still gruff. "Everyone else here thinks I'm a bitter old fool." Lily looked at her for a long moment. "I don't think that," she said simply. "I think you're someone who comes here for lunch just like everyone else. And everybody deserves to be treated with respect." Margaret didn't respond, but Lily saw something flicker in her eyes. Maybe it was surprise. Maybe it was gratitude. Or maybe it was just the tiniest spark of hope that someone in this world still saw her as a human being. As Lily walked back to the kitchen, Patricia cornered her. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "That woman is trouble. She's been coming here for years and she's never had a kind word for anyone. Trust me, you're better off staying away from her." But Lily just shrugged. "She seems lonely," she said. "And I know what that feels like." Patricia shook her head but didn't push the issue. Lily went back to her duties, serving food and cleaning tables. But throughout the rest of the afternoon, her eyes kept drifting back to Margaret, sitting alone in that corner, still holding her photograph. Lily didn't know it yet, but that simple act of kindness, that one moment of choosing compassion over judgment, was about to change both of their lives forever. Because Margaret Chen wasn't just some lonely old woman that everyone hated. She had a story, a past full of pain and regret, and hidden in that past was a secret that would eventually connect her to one of the most powerful people in the entire city. After that first day, something changed. Lily started sitting with Margaret during her lunch breaks. Not every single day, but often enough that people began to notice, and they weren't happy about it. "You're making a mistake," Patricia warned her one afternoon while they were restocking supplies in the kitchen. "That woman has been coming here for years, and she's never been anything but nasty to everyone. There's a reason she sits alone." But Lily had already made up her mind. She'd seen something in Margaret that day, something that reminded her of her own loneliness after her parents died. That feeling of being invisible, of wondering if anyone in the world actually cared whether you existed or not. So she kept sitting with Margaret. And slowly, very slowly, the old woman started to open up. It began with small things. Margaret mentioned that she used to work in the garment district downtown, sewing clothes in a factory for nearly 30 years. Her fingers were crooked now from arthritis, but she still remembered every stitch, every pattern. "I made wedding dresses," Margaret said one day, a hint of pride creeping into her usually harsh voice. "Beautiful ones. Lace and silk." Women would cry when they tried them on. "That sounds amazing," Lily replied. "I can barely sew a button back on." Margaret almost smiled, almost. "It's not hard. Just takes patience. Something nobody has anymore." Another day, Margaret talked about gardening. She used to grow tomatoes and herbs on her fire escape, back when her hands didn't shake so much. "Best tomatoes you ever tasted," she said. "Not like the garbage they sell in stores now." Lily learned that Margaret had come to America when she was young, barely speaking English, with nothing but a single suitcase and a lot of determination. She'd worked hard her whole life, saved every penny, and never asked anyone for help. "I didn't have a choice," Margaret said simply. "You do what you have to do to survive." Lily understood that feeling more than Margaret knew. Between her college classes, her 2 part-time jobs, and taking care of Tommy, she was running on about 5 hours of sleep a night. Some mornings she woke up so tired she could barely move. But she kept going because what else could she do? 3 weeks after they'd started eating lunch together, Lily walked Margaret home for the first time. It was getting dark earlier now that fall was coming, and Margaret had mentioned that the walk back to her apartment was getting harder. Her knees hurt, she said, and sometimes she got dizzy. "I'll walk with you," Lily offered. "I'm headed that direction anyway." That was a lie. Lily's apartment was in the opposite direction. But Margaret didn't need to know that. The walk was only 3 blocks, but it took them nearly 15 minutes. Margaret moved slowly, stopping every few steps to catch her breath. When they finally reached her building, Lily felt her heart sink. The place was falling apart. Paint peeled off the walls in huge strips. The front door hung crooked on its hinges, and the smell of mildew hit her the moment they stepped inside. "You live here?" Lily asked before she could stop herself. Margaret's face hardened. "It's what I can afford," she said defensively. "Not all of us have fancy apartments." "I didn't mean it like that," Lily said quickly. "I just worry about you walking up the stairs every day." "What floor are you on?" "3rd floor, and the elevator hasn't worked in 2 years." Lily insisted on walking Margaret all the way up. The stairwell was dark with only one working light bulb on the 2nd floor landing. When they reached Margaret's apartment, the old woman fumbled with her keys for a moment before getting the door open. The apartment was small and cold. Really cold. Lily could see her breath in the air. "Is your heater broken?" she asked. Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "Landlord says he'll fix it." "Been saying that for a month now." Lily looked around the tiny space. There wasn't much furniture. A worn couch, a small television that looked like it was from the 90s, and a kitchen table with 1 chair. But the place was clean, spotlessly clean. Margaret might not have much, but she kept what she had neat and organized. "Thank you for walking me home," Margaret said, clearly ready for Lily to leave. "I'll see you tomorrow," Lily replied. "At the center." Margaret just nodded, already closing the door. That night, Lily couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about that freezing apartment, about Margaret climbing those dark stairs every day, about how alone she must feel. Finally, around midnight, she got up and went to her closet. She pulled out an extra blanket, one her mother had made years ago. It was thick and warm, and Lily had been keeping it as one of the few things she had left from her mom. The next day, she brought the blanket to the community center, wrapped in a plastic bag. "I have too many blankets," she lied when she handed it to Margaret. "And I thought maybe you could use this until your heater gets fixed." Margaret stared at the blanket for a long moment. Then she looked up at Lily, and for the first time her eyes were shining with tears. "You don't have too many blankets," she said quietly. "I can tell." "Maybe not," Lily admitted. "But I want you to have it anyway." Margaret took the blanket, holding it against her chest. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't need to. Lily could see it in her face. After that day, their friendship deepened. Lily started walking Margaret home twice a week, and eventually Margaret began telling her more about her past. She talked about the long hours at the factory, about learning English by watching television, about the tiny apartment she'd lived in when she first came to America. But whenever the conversation got close to anything about family, Margaret shut down. The photograph of the young boy was always with her, but she never talked about him. And Lily learned not to ask. One evening, about 6 weeks after they'd first met, Lily arrived at Margaret's apartment with a bag of groceries. She'd managed to pick up some extra hours at her other job, and she'd used the money to buy some fresh vegetables, bread, and soup. "I can't accept this," Margaret said, her voice sharp, but her hands were already reaching for the bag. "Too late," Lily said cheerfully. "I already bought it. Besides, I got too much and it'll just go bad if someone doesn't eat it." Margaret's expression softened. "You're a terrible liar, you know that?" "Yeah, Tommy tells me that all the time." "Tommy?" "My little brother. He's 16. It's just the 2 of us now." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Where are your parents?" "They died 2 years ago," Lily said simply. "Car accident." "I'm sorry," Margaret said, and she sounded like she genuinely meant it. "That's hard. Raising a teenager on your own." "Some days are harder than others," Lily admitted. "But we manage." They stood there in the doorway, 2 people who had both lost so much, who both knew what it meant to keep going even when everything felt impossible. "You're a good person, Lily," Margaret said finally. "Better than I deserve." "Everyone deserves kindness," Lily replied. Everyone. Over the next few weeks, Lily noticed that Margaret seemed a little less harsh with the other people at the community center. She still complained about the food, but her tone wasn't quite as sharp. She even said hello to one of the other seniors, an old man named Frank who always wore a baseball cap. "Look at that," Patricia said to Lily one day. "I think you're actually getting through to her." But just when things seemed to be getting better, everything changed. It was a Thursday evening. Lily had planned to stop by Margaret's apartment after her shift at her other job, just to check in. But when she arrived and knocked on the door, there was no answer. "Margaret?" she called out. "It's me, Lily." Still nothing. A bad feeling settled in her stomach. She tried the doorknob and found it unlocked. That was strange. Margaret always locked her door. Lily pushed the door open slowly. "Margaret? Are you okay?" That's when she saw her. Margaret was lying on the floor near the kitchen table, conscious but unable to get up. Her face was pale and she was breathing heavily. "I fell," Margaret whispered. "A few hours ago. Couldn't reach the phone." Lily's heart was racing as she pulled out her cell phone and dialed 911. She knelt down next to Margaret, taking her cold hand. "Help is coming," she said. "Just hold on. You're going to be okay." Margaret squeezed her hand weakly. "The photograph," she said. "On the table. Please don't let them lose it." Lily grabbed the worn photograph and tucked it safely into her pocket. "I've got it. Don't worry." As they waited for the ambulance, Margaret's eyes started to close. She was mumbling something, words that didn't quite make sense. But then Lily heard it clearly. "David," Margaret whispered. "My son, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, David." And in that moment, Lily realized that the photograph wasn't of a grandson. It was Margaret's son. And wherever he was, whatever had happened between them, the pain of that loss was still eating Margaret alive after all these years. The ambulance ride to the hospital felt like it lasted forever. Lily sat next to Margaret, holding her hand, watching the paramedics check her vital signs. Margaret drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling words that Lily couldn't quite understand. At the hospital, the emergency room doctor examined Margaret and determined she had a mild concussion and severe bruising. But nothing was broken. They wanted to keep her overnight for observation. When the nurse asked for emergency contact information, Margaret just shook her head. "There's no one," she said quietly. "What about your son?" Lily asked gently. "David?" Margaret's eyes snapped open, suddenly alert. "How do you know that name?" "You said it. When you were lying on the floor." "You said his name?" Margaret turned her face toward the wall. "There's still no one to call." The nurse looked at Lily with sympathy. "Are you family?" "I'm her friend," Lily said firmly. "Then you can stay with her if you'd like, at least until we move her to a room." Lily nodded and pulled a chair close to Margaret's bed. She sent a quick text to Tommy, letting him know she'd be late getting home, and settled in for a long night. Around 2 in the morning, Margaret finally spoke. Her voice was hoarse and tired. "You must think I'm pathetic. An old woman with no family, no friends, nobody to call when she's hurt." "I don't think that at all," Lily replied softly. "Well, you should." Margaret was quiet for a moment, then continued. "I wasn't always alone, you know. I had a son, David. He was everything to me." Lily didn't say anything, just listened. "I came to this country with nothing," Margaret continued. "My husband died when David was just 3 years old. Heart attack. Just like that, I was alone with a small child in a country where I barely spoke the language. I worked 3 jobs some weeks. Factory work during the day, cleaning offices at night, and laundry on the weekends." She paused, her breathing labored. "I wanted David to have everything I never had. A good education, opportunities, a real future. So I pushed him. God, I pushed him so hard." Margaret's hands clenched the hospital blanket. "I made him study when other kids were playing. I didn't let him waste time on things I thought were foolish. Sports, friends, fun. I told him those things didn't matter. Only success mattered." "You were doing your best," Lily said. "No," Margaret said sharply. "I was being cruel. I just didn't see it that way at the time. I thought I was being a good mother. A strong mother. The kind of mother who prepared her child for a hard world." She closed her eyes and tears started rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. "David was so smart. He got a full scholarship to a university 3 states away. I was proud, but I couldn't show it. Instead, I told him not to waste the opportunity. I told him to focus on his studies and not get distracted. When did you last see him? Lily asked. 30 years ago? Margaret's voice broke. He was 23. He'd graduated, gotten a good job. He came to visit me, told me he'd met someone, a woman he wanted to marry. He was so happy, so excited. And you know what I said? Lily waited. I told him he was too young to get married. I said she was probably just after his money. I criticized everything about his life, his choices, his plans. We had a terrible fight. Margaret's whole body was shaking now. He left that night and told me he was done. Done trying to please me. Done trying to earn my approval. He said I'd spent his whole childhood making him feel like he was never good enough, and he wasn't going to live that way anymore. Margaret, I was too proud to apologize, too stubborn to admit I was wrong. I thought he'd come back eventually, that he'd realize I only wanted what was best for him, but he never did. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. I heard things through the grapevine, that he'd gotten married, that he'd started his own company, that he was successful. Margaret opened her eyes and looked at Lily. I told myself it was better this way, that he didn't need a bitter old woman in his life. But the truth is I was scared. Scared that if I reached out, he'd reject me, and I couldn't face that. It's not too late, Lily said. You could still contact him? Yes, it is. I don't even know where he lives now. I don't have his phone number. And even if I did, why would he want to hear from me? I was a terrible mother. Demanding, never satisfied. He's better off without me. I don't believe that, Lily said firmly. And I don't think you believe it either. If you really thought he was better off without you, you wouldn't carry his photograph everywhere you go. Margaret reached for Lily's hand. How did you become so wise at 22? I'm not wise. I just know what it's like to lose people you love. My parents and we had our problems too. They didn't approve of some of my choices. We argued a lot, especially my last year of high school. But after they died, I would have given anything for one more conversation, one more chance to tell them I loved them, even when we didn't see eye to eye. They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Margaret spoke again. Even if I wanted to find David, I wouldn't know how. I don't have a computer. I can barely work my old flip phone. I could help you, Lily offered. If you want me to. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. Why are you doing this? Being so kind to me? You barely know me. And you have your own problems to deal with. Because everyone deserves a second chance, Lily said simply. And because you do the same for me. Would I? Margaret asked, genuinely uncertain. Yes, Lily said with conviction. I think underneath all that armor you wear, you're a good person who's been hurt and scared for a very long time. Margaret squeezed Lily's hand, and for the first time since they'd met, she actually smiled. A real, genuine smile. The next few days were difficult. Margaret was released from the hospital, but she was weaker than before. The fall had taken a lot out of her. Lily helped her get home, made sure she had food, and checked on her every day after work. But Lily's own situation was getting worse. Her landlord had posted an eviction notice on her door. She was 3 weeks behind on rent, and he wasn't willing to wait any longer. She had until the end of the month to pay what she owed or move out. Lily didn't tell Margaret about the eviction notice. She didn't want to burden her with more problems. But Margaret could sense something was wrong. You look tired, Margaret observed one afternoon when Lily stopped by. More tired than usual. I'm fine, Lily lied. Just busy with school and work. You're a terrible liar, remember? I already told you that. Margaret studied her face. What's wrong? Lily tried to hold it together, but she was exhausted and scared and running out of options. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. I'm going to lose my apartment. I can't make rent this month, and my landlord is kicking us out. I don't know what I'm going to do. I've been looking for somewhere cheaper, but everything requires first and last month's rent, and I don't have that kind of money. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she struggled to her feet and shuffled to her bedroom. She came back carrying a small wooden box. My husband's watch, she said, opening the box to reveal an old but elegant timepiece. It's worth something. Maybe a few $100s. I want you to sell it and use the money for your rent. Margaret, no. I can't take that. It's all you have left of him. Exactly. It's all I have left. And what good does it do sitting in a box? I'm an old woman who's going to die alone because I was too proud to ask for forgiveness. But you're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. You have a brother who needs you. And you've shown me more kindness in the last few months than I've experienced in 30 years. I still can't take it, Lily said, tears streaming down her face. Margaret pressed the box into her hands. Yes, you can, because you've given me something far more valuable. You've given me hope. For the first time in decades, I feel like maybe I'm not completely worthless. Like maybe there's still some good I can do in this world. Please let me help you. Let me do this one good thing. Lily looked down at the watch, then back at Margaret. She thought about Tommy, about keeping a roof over their heads, about how sometimes accepting help is just as important as offering it. Okay, she whispered. Thank you. Thank you so much. Margaret pulled her into a hug and they both cried together. Two people who'd been struggling alone for so long, finally finding comfort in each other's presence. Lily sold the watch the next day. It brought in enough money to cover her rent for 2 months, which gave her a little breathing room. But she couldn't stop thinking about Margaret and David. The pain in Margaret's voice when she talked about her son haunted Lily. That weekend, after Tommy went to bed, Lily sat down with her laptop. She'd been thinking about this for days, and she finally made a decision. She was going to try to find David Chen. She started with a simple internet search. David Chen. There were thousands of results. She added more details. David Chen, businessman. David Chen, company owner. She scrolled through page after page, clicking on links, reading articles, trying to find anything that might connect to Margaret's son. And then on the third page of search results, she found something that made her heart stop. David Chen, CEO of Chen Enterprises, age 53. Headquartered in the downtown financial district, less than 5 miles from where Margaret lived. Lily clicked on the company website. There was a photo of David on the leadership page. He was older now, obviously, but she could see the resemblance to the little boy in Margaret's photograph. The same eyes, the same serious expression. Chen Enterprises was huge. The website talked about technology investments, real estate developments, and charitable foundations. David Chen wasn't just successful. He was one of the wealthiest people in the entire city. Lily sat back in her chair, stunned. Margaret's son, the boy she'd pushed so hard and eventually lost, had become incredibly successful. And he was right here in the same city, probably no more than a 20-minute drive from his mother's freezing apartment. She spent the next hour reading everything she could find about David Chen, articles in business magazines, interviews about his company's growth, photos from charity events. He was married with 2 grown children. He'd built his company from nothing, starting with a small tech startup 30 years ago. But nowhere in any of the articles did she see any mention of his mother. Lily closed her laptop and stared at the wall. What should she do with this information? Should she tell Margaret? Should she try to contact David herself? She thought about it all night, barely sleeping. By Monday morning, she'd made a decision. She wouldn't tell Margaret yet. Not until she knew if David would even be willing to see his mother. She couldn't risk raising Margaret's hopes only to have them crushed. During her lunch break at the community center, Lily looked up the address for Chen Enterprises. It was in one of those gleaming glass towers downtown, the kind of building that regular people only saw from the outside. The next day was Tuesday, her day off from the center. She told Tommy she had to run an errand and took the bus downtown. As the bus got closer to the financial district, Lily felt her confidence starting to fade. What was she doing? She couldn't just walk into a billion-dollar company and ask to see the CEO, but she'd come this far. And Margaret deserved this chance, even if she didn't know it yet. The Chen Enterprises building was even more intimidating in person. All glass and steel stretching up into the sky. Lily walked through the revolving door into a massive lobby with marble floors and modern art on the walls. A security guard at the front desk looked up as she approached. He was young, maybe in his 30s, with a name tag that said, "Robert, can I help you?" he asked, not unkindly but clearly sizing her up. Lily suddenly became very aware of her worn jeans and old jacket. She probably looked exactly like what she was, a struggling college student who didn't belong there. "I need to speak with David Chen," she said, trying to sound confident. Robert raised an eyebrow. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's important. It's about his mother." "His mother?" Robert looked skeptical. "Look, miss, I hear all kinds of stories from people trying to get in to see Mr. Chen. Everyone's got an important reason, but unless you have an appointment, I can't let you up." "Please," Lily said. His mother is sick. She's alone, and I think he needs to know. Robert's expression softened slightly, but he shook his head. I'm sorry. Those are the rules. If you want to contact Mr. Chen, you can send a letter to the company's main address. It's on the website. Lily felt tears of frustration building. She'd been so naive to think she could just walk in here and make this happen. Can I at least leave him a note? She asked. Something that might actually get to him. Robert hesitated, then sighed. Wait here. He disappeared into a back office and returned with a piece of paper and an envelope. Write your message. I'll put it in the mail that goes up to the executive floor, but I can't promise he'll see it. Mr. Chen gets hundreds of letters every week. Thank you, Lily said sincerely. Thank you so much. She sat down in one of the lobby chairs and stared at the blank paper. How do you summarize something like this in a letter? How do you explain 30 years of pain and regret in a few paragraphs? Finally, she just started writing from her heart. Dear Mr. Chen, my name is Lily Bennett. I'm writing to you about your mother, Margaret Chen. I know this might come as a shock, but I've gotten to know her over the past few months. She comes to the community center where I work, and we've become friends. She's told me about you, about the past, about how much she regrets the way things ended between you. Margaret is 73 years old now. She lives alone in a rundown apartment where the heat doesn't work. She's not in good health. She recently had a bad fall. But more than any physical pain, she carries the weight of losing you. She carries your photograph with her everywhere. She talks about you with such deep regret. I know I have no right to interfere in your life or your family's business, but I've seen how much your mother is suffering, and I believe that everyone deserves a second chance at reconciliation, even if they've made mistakes. She was trying to be a good mother in the only way she knew how. She pushed you because she wanted you to have the life she never had. I'm not asking you to forgive her or to have a relationship with her. I'm just asking you to consider meeting with her, even once, because I think she's running out of time and I know she'd give anything to tell you she's sorry. If you want to contact me, my phone number is below. Thank you for reading this. Sincerely, Lily Bennett. She read it over 3 times, wondering if she should change anything. But in the end, she left it as it was. Honest. Simple. From the heart. She put the letter in the envelope, wrote David Chen, CEO, on the front, and handed it to Robert. I really hope he sees this, she said. Robert nodded. I'll make sure it gets to his floor. That's the best I can do. Lily thanked him again and left the building. As she rode the bus back home, she felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. She'd done what she could. Now it was out of her hands. She didn't tell Margaret about the letter. What if David never responded? What if he read it and decided he wanted nothing to do with his mother? Lily couldn't bear the thought of disappointing Margaret after giving her hope. The days passed slowly. Lily went to work, went to class, took care of Tommy, and visited Margaret every other day. Margaret's health seemed to be declining. She was eating less, sleeping more. The light in her eyes seemed dimmer. One afternoon, about a week after Lily had delivered the letter, Margaret took her hand. I want to tell you something, the old woman said, in case anything happens to me. You've been like a daughter to me these past few months, the daughter I never had, and I want you to know that you've made these last weeks of my life worth living. Don't talk like that, Lily said, her voice catching. You're going to be fine. But Margaret just smiled sadly. We both know that's not true. I'm old, Lily, and I'm tired. I've lived with my regrets for so long, they've become part of me. But you've shown me that there's still goodness in the world, that there are still people who care, even about a bitter old woman like me. Lily held her hand and cried. She wanted to tell Margaret about the letter, about David, about the hope that maybe, just maybe, things could still be made right. But she kept quiet. She couldn't risk it. What Lily didn't know was that her letter had made it past the security desk. It had been sorted with the Daily Mail and placed in a stack on the desk of David Chen's executive assistant. And that assistant, a woman who'd been with the company for 15 years, had opened it and read it with tears in her eyes. She'd placed it on top of David's inbox with a note attached. You need to read this immediately. And somewhere in that glass tower downtown, David Chen was about to read words that would change everything. David Chen sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor, staring at the letter in his hands. He'd read it 3 times already, and each time the words hit him harder. His mother, Margaret Chen, the woman he'd spent 30 years trying not to think about. He looked out the window at the city below. his mind flooding with memories he'd buried long ago. His childhood, the cramped apartment, his mother's constant criticism, the way nothing he did was ever good enough, but also other memories. His mother working 3 jobs so he could have school supplies, the way she'd sit at the kitchen table late at night, sewing by lamplight, her fingers moving with practiced precision, the pride in her eyes, quickly hidden when he brought home good grades. He'd told himself for years that he was better off without her, that she'd been toxic, controlling, impossible to please. And those things were true, but they weren't the whole truth. David picked up his phone and dialed his assistant. "Helen, that letter you put on my desk. Do you have the contact information for the woman who wrote it?" "Yes, Mr. Chen, Lily Bennett. Her number's at the bottom of the letter. Clear my schedule for tomorrow afternoon." "All of it." There was a pause. "Sir, you have the investor meeting at 2 and the board presentation at 4. Reschedule them." "This is more important." Helen had worked for David long enough to know when not to argue. "Of course, sir. Should I call Miss Bennett for you?" "No," David said quietly. "I'll do it myself." That evening, after everyone else had left the office, David sat alone in the dark and dialed Lily's number. His hand was shaking. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this nervous. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. "Hello?" A young woman's voice, cautious. "Is this Lily Bennett?" "Yes, who's calling?" David took a deep breath. "This is David Chen. You wrote me a letter about my mother." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Oh my God, you actually read it." "I didn't think, I hoped, but I didn't really expect." "I read it," David said. "Every word. And I need to see her. I need to see my mother." Lily was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "She doesn't know I contacted you. I didn't want to get her hopes up in case you didn't respond." "I understand. Can we meet somewhere first? You and me? I need to know what I'm walking into. It's been 30 years. I need to understand what's happened to her." They arranged to meet the next morning at a coffee shop near the community center. David barely slept that night. He kept thinking about the last time he'd seen his mother, the terrible things they'd said to each other, the door slamming shut behind him as he walked away for what he thought would be forever. The next morning, he drove himself to the coffee shop. No driver, no assistant, no security, just him. When he walked in, he spotted Lily immediately. She was sitting in the corner, wearing a simple sweater and jeans, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She looked up as he approached, and he saw her eyes widen slightly. He was used to that reaction. The expensive suit, the air of authority, the way people recognized him from business magazines. "Mr. Chen," she said, starting to stand. "Please sit, and call me David." He sat across from her. "Thank you for writing that letter. I'm sure it wasn't easy." "Your mother's an amazing person," Lily said simply. "She just doesn't know it." Over the next hour, Lily told him everything. About how they'd met, about Margaret's loneliness, about the fall, about the stories Margaret had shared. She told him about the apartment with no heat, about the photograph Margaret carried, about the way she'd cried when talking about her son. David listened, his throat getting tighter with each detail. The successful CEO who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions felt tears running down his face in a public coffee shop. "I was so angry at her for so long," he said finally. "She was hard on me, really hard. And I convinced myself that she'd ruined my childhood, that she'd never loved me. But hearing you talk about her now, I realize something." "What's that?" Lily asked gently. "She did love me. She just didn't know how to show it. She was a single mother in a foreign country, terrified that I'd end up poor like she was. She pushed me because she was scared, not because she didn't care." He wiped his eyes, and I was too young and too angry to see it. "She knows she made mistakes," Lily said. "She's carried that guilt for 30 years. "So have I," David admitted. "I've thought about reaching out so many times. But I was too proud, too stubborn, just like her." He looked at Lily with new understanding. "You're an incredible person, you know that? My mother's lucky to have you." Lily shook her head. "I'm the lucky one. She's taught me a lot about resilience, about surviving when life beats you down, about the importance of second chances." David took a deep breath. "Will you take me to her?" No. Don't you need time to prepare?" "I've had 30 years to prepare," David said. "I'm not waiting another day." They drove to Margaret's apartment building in David's car. He stared out the window at the neighborhood, recognizing it from his childhood. When they pulled up to the rundown building, he felt his heart sink. This is where she lives? Lily just nodded. They climbed the 3 flights of dark stairs. David's hands were trembling as Lily knocked on the apartment door. "It's me, Margaret." "Lily, I brought someone to see you." There was a shuffling sound inside. Then the door opened. Margaret stood there, her eyes suspicious, scanning the hallway. Then her gaze landed on David. The photograph she'd carried for 30 years had shown a 7-year-old boy. Standing before her now was a 53-year-old man in an expensive suit. But she knew those eyes. She knew that face. "David?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Hi, Mom." Margaret's knees buckled. David caught her, holding her up, and suddenly they were both crying. 30 years of pain, anger, regret, and love poured out in that narrow hallway. "I'm sorry," Margaret sobbed. "I'm so sorry. I was a terrible mother. I pushed you too hard. I never told you I loved you. I never showed you that you were enough just as you were. No, Mom, I'm sorry. I should have come back. I should have called. I was angry and proud and stupid. And I wasted 30 years we could have had together." They held each other, making up for decades of missing hugs, while Lily stood nearby, tears streaming down her own face. Eventually, they moved inside the apartment. David looked around at the tiny, cold space and felt sick. While his mother had been living like this, he'd been in a mansion with more rooms than he could count. They sat on the old couch, and Margaret couldn't stop touching his face, his hands, as if making sure he was real. "You're so successful," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "I heard stories over the years. I was so proud of you. I learned it from you," David said. "The work ethic, the determination, the refusal to give up. You gave me all of that. But I didn't give you love. Not the way I should have." "You loved me the only way you knew how," David replied. "And I was too young to understand. But I understand now." They talked for hours. About the past, the pain, the misunderstandings. David learned about his mother's life over the past 30 years. The loneliness, the regrets, the way she'd shut everyone out because she felt she didn't deserve connection. Margaret learned about David's life. His wife, his children, his success. And she cried again when she realized she had grandchildren she'd never met. "I want you to meet them," David said. "My kids, your grandchildren. And I want you out of this apartment today. You're coming home with me." "David, I can't. You have your own life. Your family." "You're my family," he said firmly. "And I've wasted enough time." "We both have." He turned to Lily, who'd been sitting quietly, letting them have their moment. "And you. I don't know how to thank you for this. For caring about my mother when no one else did. For finding me. For giving us this second chance." "Just love her," Lily said simply. "That's all the thanks I need." David reached into his jacket and pulled out his business card. "I want to do something for you. You're in school, right? Let me pay for your education. And when you graduate, there's a position at my company if you want it." "I can't accept that," Lily protested. "Yes, you can," Margaret said, taking Lily's hand. "Let us help you, the way you've helped me." 3 months later, Lily stood in the backyard of David's home, watching Margaret play with her grandchildren. The old woman looked different now. Healthier, happier, with color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. She was wearing a new dress, and when she laughed at something one of the kids said, it was a sound of pure joy. David walked over and stood next to Lily. "The community center is planning a little celebration," he said. "They want to honor you for what you did." Lily shrugged. "I just saw someone who needed a friend. You saw someone everyone else had written off. You chose kindness when it would have been easier to walk away. That's not just anything." Margaret noticed them talking and came over, holding the hand of David's youngest daughter. "Lily, sweetheart, come join us. We're about to cut the cake." As they walked toward the house together, Margaret squeezed Lily's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "For giving me back my son. For giving me back my life." "You did that yourself," Lily replied. "You just needed someone to believe you deserved it." And in that moment, watching this family that had been broken for so long finally made whole, Lily understood something important. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. Sometimes seeing the humanity in someone everyone else has rejected can save not just one life, but many. The elderly woman everyone had hated had found her way home, and it all started with one young woman who chose compassion over judgment, who chose to see worth where others saw only bitterness. That's the real power of love. It transforms everything it touches.